This is Dan, and this is the Napkin Academy. This lesson, we're still in the process step of imagining. We're still on the squid, and now we are on letter 4 of the squid, the I, which, as we remember, stands for individual or comparison. So as I think about my idea, whatever my idea might be, am I more interested in showing it by itself and some of the details that make it unique, or am I interested in showing it in comparison to lots of other things in order to show what makes it unique by showing how that is different than other things? So just to make this real, let's go through a couple of examples, and let's start with a simple one. Imagine if I wanted to describe to you something about baseball. I could say, this is a baseball. And it's pretty interesting because if you look at a baseball all by itself, you see some pretty interesting aspects to it. It's of a particular size, and it's got that stitching along the edges. And that is exactly what makes it a baseball. Pretty unique. And in fact, if we really wanted to show that it was a baseball, let's make it a fancy one. Let's make it a signed one. Let's say this is a Ty Cobb signed baseball. So there you have it. An individual view of the ball used in baseball. There it is. But let's say what was really important was to determine how is this baseball different from other types of balls. So now I have my baseball. I start with my same individual, but then I'm going to compare it to some other kinds of balls. And let's go ahead and draw them in scale. So here's how my baseball compares to a football. And let's say here's how my baseball compares to a basketball. A lot bigger, different kind of pattern on the basketball. And let's see how that baseball compares to, say, a soccer ball, which has yet a different pattern on the outside and, of course, is a different size. So there we've got a nice comparison. What's interesting here are the details of the unique item. What's interesting on the comparison side is how does that align or how does that not align to other items. Let's do one more example. Let's say that you and I had a business, and we've identified that the typical customer for our business is kind of let's just say a traditional sort of business guy. And here I'm drawing one of my little block figures because I'm more interested in showing things about his body. So traditional business guy, he's wearing a suit, he's got his tie, there he is. This is our customer. And we're showing him all by himself. Individual view of our customer. And we know some things about him, a little bit conservative. There we see, how do we know that? Well, because he's got that tie on there, and he's got on, can't see it here, but he's wearing wingtips, traditional old shoes. Fine. And now we know that he's our customer, and he's the perfect customer for us because our business, let's say we're in the business of making very traditional and conservative business briefcases. Okay, and there's the briefcase, perfect for that guy. Well, that might not be the only type of customer. What would happen if we wanted to compare to other potential customers? So let's say we had a customer who might look something like this. Let's say we had a customer who was a woman. And she's wearing fairly casual clothes in this case. Going about doing what she needs to do. Is she going to be interested in this briefcase? I don't know, possibly, but they certainly don't look a whole lot alike. Here's another type of customer that we could compare to. Let's say that we've got another guy now. Okay, so we're on the right demographic, but this guy looking different. This guy, super casual. He's out here wearing his Bermuda shorts and, of course, his big old Hawaiian shirt. Big, beautiful hibiscus flowers on his shirt. And he's wearing the shades. Yeah, and he's got kind of a swoop-de-doo there. I don't know. What do we think? Is this guy the market for our briefcase? Maybe not. Probably not. This is what we get from making our individual versus our comparison. Now, what's interesting, of course, about drawing pictures like this is we say, well, if we make briefcases and they're focused on this type of guy and unlikely to sell to these other customers, could we make some kind of bag or carrying case that might be interesting for her? How would that compare to what we already offer? And what does Mr. Hawaiian dude over here want? I don't know. Maybe he wants some kind of woven shoulder bag or something in which he can carry his flowers. something like that. So here's another type of bag we could make. Individual versus comparison. And of course, if we wanted to go even further with this, we could bring in all of them, and we could make a comparison to all possible demographics, all possible profiles. And we could say, well, given the type of product we make now, we suspect it'd be interesting for this type of person and this type of person, but maybe not interesting for that type of person and that type. So now we can get a big comparison. Again, the difference is what makes our customer unique when we look at him all by himself? What makes our customer unique when we look at him in comparison to everyone else? All right, let's try one more example, and let's try this one. Let's imagine that we've decided to start a new car company, and we're going to call our car company Star Cars. We're launching an entirely new brand, and as we think about it from an individual perspective, we're thinking about what do we want to make as the price point of our car. And let's say over here is cheap, and over on this other side is expensive. And as we think about our Star Cars, we think that, between those two, they're really going to fall somewhere right in the middle. It's going to be a mid-range car right about there. Well, that's a nice individual way of starting to think about our brand, and it gives us some ideas about how to proceed. But it could be even more compelling if we're launching a new product to think about a comparison picture. And now what we can do is we can take our little two-dimensional spectrum and turn it into a full map. We've made maps before, and let's say we're thinking about that brand of Star Cars, and we're interested in reasonably good quality, so we want to be a good car as opposed to a bad car. And we're going to come in right in the middle in terms of price. Well, price compared to what? Well, let's go ahead and take a second and fill out this map that we've created. We've done maps before with other competitive cars, so we can compare where Star Car is going to fit in relation to others. Now, can we come up with an expensive, good car brand? Well, I'll bet we can. How about we pick something like Mercedes? All right? It's a good car, but it is expensive. Well, now, can we think of an expensive car that is not very good? And I'm going to get myself in a lot of trouble for this, but I did a session like this the other day in a workshop, and someone yelled at me and they said they had bought an Audi and they weren't happy with their Audi. It cost a lot of money, but it wasn't particularly good. It was breaking down. So I don't want to be pejorative about Audi, but we can imagine, at least for the purposes of this, that it's an expensive car and maybe it's not as good as it could be. Well, now let's go over to this corner up here and say, can we think of a car that's good but inexpensive? Well, yeah. Reasonably good, getting better all the time. We could put in here something like a Chevrolet, or better quality even than that, perhaps, is we could put in a Toyota. So now we've got a couple of options of good cars that are a little on the cheaper side. And can we imagine, just to fill out our quad chart here, what is a cheap car that is bad, not very good? I don't know. I'm just going to make this up, but let's say perhaps a Kia. I don't even know. But let's just say that we fleshed it out. So now the idea is, by moving from an individual picture of our Star Car to a comparative picture, we've got a little thought experiment, a little imagination experiment that's going on that's saying, well, look, in terms of pricing, we're going to put ourselves in between Toyota and Mercedes. So we're going to be a little more expensive than Toyota, a little cheaper than Mercedes, but in terms of quality, we're going to be right up there at about the same line as those. So now we've got a nice way of thinking about how do we, again, position our brand by making a comparison to other brands. Which brings us to, when would we want to use an individual picture? When do we want to think about our idea all by itself versus when do we want to make a comparison picture? When do we want to think about our idea in relation to other similar or dissimilar ideas? Well, I think there are a couple of times when we'd want to make the individual picture. And really, it comes down to something quite simple. We want to use the individual picture when we really want someone to focus on the details of this idea, of one idea. I really want you to focus on the details of what makes this thing this. How big is it? How much does it weigh? What does it look like? When I really want to focus on the details of one item. Now, I might want to focus on the details because I really don't want to get distracted. I don't want to get distracted by lots of other extraneous information. So I show individual when I don't want to be distracted by anything else. Now I might want to remain undistracted because perhaps I want you to focus on this idea, because I am certain that this is the right one. That I want our decision is clear. We only have one choice and that's it. So please focus on this one and let's look at the details. That's when I really want to draw an individual picture. Now, why would I want to draw then a comparison picture? Well, clearly something's going to be a little bit different if I want to compare to something. I'm less interested in the details, but I'm more interested in, let's say, the broader context. I want to know, in this picture, how does my one thing, that one idea, again, compare to other ideas so that I can make measurements to see how it's different. How would I need to differentiate this one from all the others? So broader context, less about the detail, more about the overall. And I might want to do that because I am not certain. In fact, I am uncertain about which decision to make. And I am checking my options. And I want to make sure that I've been inclusive. Is the one idea I had really the right one? Well, how would I know unless I had a chance to compare it to some of those other ideas? So really that's kind of the breakdown of it. I draw an individual picture when I'm certain and I want to focus on the details. I draw a comparison picture when I'm less certain and I want to still remain open to what are my options. So let's make this real for a moment with a real world example. Probably the greatest back of the napkin sketch from a business perspective of all time. Two guys way back in the year of 1967, Herb and Rollin, are sitting in a bar in Texas. They're sitting in the St. Anthony's Club in San Antonio, Texas, and they pull out a cocktail napkin. The two of them are, one's a lawyer, one's a business guy, and they're there in Texas on a hot afternoon, and they're drinking something, and they start talking about the fact how hard it is to do business across Texas because Texas is so big. So Rollin says, hey, Herb, I have an idea. He pulls out his cocktail napkin and he starts on that to draw a map of Texas. And he says, it's interesting. Up here we've got Dallas, and way, way over here, 6 hours away, we've got Houston, and way, way over here, 6 hours away, is where we are now in San Antonio. Wouldn't it be great if we could just find an airline that could fly us between those three cities? You know what? Since no airline does it, why don't we go ahead and start an airline that would do it? And that, of course, was the start of Southwest Airlines. The most successful and profitable airline in history was literally started on the back of a napkin with that simple drawing made by Rollin King to show to Herb Kelleher. Now that is clearly an individual view. It's an individual view of a singular idea. The idea of connecting an entire state with one airline in a simple shape. Now that idea all by itself is kind of compelling, but it doesn't mean a whole lot. Why is that so important? Why back in the year of 1967 did that really make any difference? That's an individual view, which is an intriguing idea, but it's only really an intriguing idea when we show it in comparison to the other airlines of the day. So back in that year, if you looked at American Airlines, because of their hub and spoke system, this is what their route map looked like. If you looked at Continental Airlines, this is what their route map looked like. If you looked at Braniff, a huge airline back in those days, this is what their route map looked like. It's in making the comparison that we can see what a breakthrough idea this idea of Southwest Airlines was, to say, why don't we just focus on one region and have one simple path instead of the complexity that we see when we compare ourselves to everybody else. So that's starting to wrap it up for individual versus comparison. Our letter I on the squid, and now the same exercise. Let's go ahead and do it. Whether you picked your orange, I'd like you to draw two pictures. Whether you picked a computer, I'd like you to draw two pictures. Or whether you picked a car, I'd like you to draw two pictures. One of them is, what does your idea look like all by itself? And the second picture is, how does this idea, compare to others? So go ahead.